recording. There we go. So, hello everyone. Upchalasikwe. Bienvenue. My name is Jill Van Horn and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director at Food for All New Brunswick, Aliment pour tous NB. I am joining you all from the ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq, and the land on which Food for All carries out its work is, in fact, the unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq, the Passamaquoddy, and the Wolastoqey nations. It's so important that we engage in acknowledging this land that we live on and that we share, and also important to take further action from there too, that we don't end with just a land acknowledgement. And so today we are so pleased to welcome you to episode 9 of our What the Food webinar series. What the Food is intended to help us tease out some of the nuances of food systems, language, and concepts. There are so many terms that exist. I'm sure you all know food security, household food insecurity, food sovereignty, et cetera, et cetera. And there are many intersections of how these terms and concepts impact different folks in different populations. And so What the Food is a place to sort of untangle that web and deepen our understanding together. So today we are putting a focus on the intersection of disability, poverty, and food insecurity. And so we're really thrilled to have a great panel of speakers with us. We'll begin with 2 presentations from our guests and end the event with some time for questions. So take note of anything that's coming up throughout while you listen, and then you can bring them up at the end and we can have a discussion. So on today's panel, we have the great honor of having Shelley Petit. She is the chair of the NB Coalitions for the Persons with Disabilities, and Murielle, founder and communications. She's the founder of the coalition and also does communications with the coalition. As well, following Shelley and Murielle, we'll have Dana Milne, campaigner for Community Food Centers Canada Poverty Action Unit. So we really look forward to learning from all of you, and starting with Shelley and Murielle and then Dana. So first up, I'm going to switch into French now. Je vous présente Shelley.
I'd like to introduce Shelley. She is the chair of the NB Coalition of Persons with Disabilities. And before, she was becoming housebound in 2019 from severe chemical intolerance. She was a teacher and a long-time Girl Guide leader for many years. This is where she solidified her advocacy skills. She has 2 adult daughters, one with autism. So she has dealt with the system as a mom, as a client, and now as an advocate. And secondly, she will be co-presenting with Shelley. Murielle, she is the founder of the New Brunswick Coalition of Persons with Disabilities. She looks after communications, graphics, and website maintenance for the non-profit organization. The NBCPD, with Shelley Petit at the helm as chairperson, has a growing membership since its inception in 2020 and is helping a lot of people with disabilities in the province so that their voices can be heard. When she is not busy with volunteering, Murielle loves fiber arts such as freehand embroidery, rug hooking, punch needle and macrame, and weaving. Whether learning. Whether on the personal front or creativity is what drives her. Murielle was born with spina bifida, and she started working with the indie public sector at the age of 18 until she left her casual work as a social insurance clerk to study in the fields of radio broadcasting, journalism, and digital graphics. She has worked many jobs, but really made a career for herself at ExxonMobil, where she worked for 20 years. She had to go on long-term disability in 2016 and was also able to access disability CPP. So, Murielle and Shelley, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Jill. So, welcome. Today we'll be speaking about food insecurity. and how it has a real impact on people who are handicapped. So, let's start with a few definitions. So, what does a handicapped person mean? We prefer the definition, it's the social model definition. In the past, we used the medical system. You'd go to the doctor, they do some tests. If your disability was on the list, they'd write you a script, and there you are, you're a person with a disability. But if you don't have a doctor, as a lot of people in New Brunswick don't have a doctor, if you're somebody like me who has a disability that is invisible and not well known, as two doctors in Canada, or where there are two doctors in Canada who can actually say yes, you have this disability, it's really hard to be named as a person with a disability. So we prefer the social model. These are the environmental and social barriers. This is what limits our full and equal participation in society. Since a person with a disability it could be invisible, it could be cognitive, it could be visible, it could be neurodiverse, it could be mobility, it could be auditory, and more. Each day, more and more are added to the list. 40 years ago, muscular dystrophy was not seen. Muscular sclerosis was seen as something. Women, they found that pain was harder to deal with. Now it's not like that. So from one day to the next, there are more and more added to the list of disabilities. Long COVID actually has been added to that list. It's a long. The list is getting longer. So in terms of the definitions, there's food insecurity. This is a situation where the individual and/or family does not have reliable access to a sufficient quantity of nutritious and affordable food. So we have members in our coalition who, in all honesty, they eat a slice of bread a day. In Canada, that's not an acceptable thing. It's not acceptable that people are famine conditions because they have to decide between food and medicine, paying the rent and paying your groceries. Given that we have a disability, it doesn't make any sense. There's one of our members, Caitlin Massey. If you suffer from chronic pain and inflammation, it is proven that the better you eat, the better you will feel. That's not a big surprise to people, I would hope. It's not craft dinner that's going to get you there. So we know that if we eat properly or eat better, we're in better health. So a lot of us, we start with one or two disabilities over the years with stress and malnutrition and lack of medication, a lack of medical assistance. We develop other disabilities. So all we're doing is you're stealing from the day, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So we'll add to the medical costs in 2, 3, 5, 10 years because we don't want to invest a bit today to help people who are having in a situation where they have a disability. In New Brunswick, it's a pitiful scene. The 2020 census shows that in New Brunswick, 35.5% of the population have one or more disability. That's only those from 15 to 65. It's a miracle at 65 that we're healed, no more disability, and then become a senior in Canada. I really would anxious to no longer have a disability. It's the largest increase in Canada. It's an increase of 8.6%. It doesn't include the 21.9% of people who are seniors, who will often have the same types of disabilities. I have a hard time walking, for example. That happens when you get older. Maybe vision problems. My boyfriend, he doesn't hear well anymore. This happens. It brings us. So if we don't have a community, a province that is accessible for us, those of us with disabilities, it won't be accessible for our parents or our grandparents either. And then they will spend more to stay at home and have to choose. So what do I do? Well, I won't eat well. It's a major problem. So benefit rates in New Brunswick, that's another big problem. We're in the top place, first place for the worst rates. Woohoo! You have done anything wrong in your life, but you have a disability. So there's $918 a month. Good luck. And if you're lucky enough to be one of the 30% who are approved as a person with a disability, the other 70% who apply to the province are put on social assistance, regular social assistance. They don't have any help at home and perhaps no additional help for medications. How can you manage? It's important to note that the definition of disability is not as wide as ours. It's simpler to receive Canadian disability than to receive provincial New Brunswick disability for those with a disability. This is a major problem. They put in a temporary measure of $200. We're nearly certain that that was put so that the federal benefits for handicaps for disabilities are coming. Then they'll remove it. We'll see. We have a new government. Then they promised an increase in the benefits, and we hope that they will stop punishing those who can work and want to make a bit of money on part-time basis. We'll see if that will change. Well, we know that if they do what they promised, it will change, be a huge change to the lives of people with disabilities. Another huge problem that we're starting to have is power, electricity, NB power. More and more people who have benefits for their home and their rents are finding that they're taking out electricity. So now people have to pay, they pay 30% for rent. Then now they have to pay the bill for power NB power. And we all know it just increased by 10%. I fought for change. I invested hundreds of hours and I'll continue to do so. It's ridiculous what we're asking people to pay for electricity when you need to charge your wheelchair, your electric bed. You need your electric bed to live. Otherwise, we're in the hospital, and that costs $1,000 a day. Doesn't make any sense. So below that, there's another quote from one of our members. This cannot cover housing, public services, and medical costs, let alone food. And I can't read the rest because of my screen. Can you read the rest? And we all know that the food bank does not give you enough food. Not just that, often it will be food like in a can or a box. Yeah, with a lot of preservatives. Lots of people can't eat that food. For example, I have acid reflux, and that's been caused by my disability. I can't eat that, so it's just not good. It's not good for us. For them, it's hard sometimes to get fresh food, vegetables. Often, that's what we often receive from a food bank. And when we don't have enough to live on, we don't have the choice. But at the food bank, what's the food at the food bank is not good for our health either. So it adds another challenge for New Brunswickers at the end of the day. We know that 27% of Canada's population lives with at least one disability. 28% of those with a disability live in poverty. That's more than our people. Wow, we've done nothing wrong. We have a disability, but it leads directly to poverty. 73% of people with intellectual disabilities and live alone live in poverty. And what that means is often they're not living at home. Beyond that, we put them in institutions. It's supposed to be prohibited in Canada, but it still happens, my friends. To say that if they're living there, they're not living in poverty, that's a hard decision. Do I want to live with some ability, or do I want to eat? That's not a choice that people should be called on to make in their life. The poverty line for a person with a disability is approximately 30% higher than that of a person without a disability. Why is this? If your hands don't work well, you can't cut your vegetables and your fruits. You have to buy them pre-cut. It's more expensive. If you can't drive or you don't have access to a vehicle, you have to get things delivered. You have to get your groceries delivered. And it costs a lot more. Each grocery delivery, there'll be delivery costs, and the food as such, each article, there's a percentage that you pay in addition. I have a bag waiting at the door for me right now. It's $100 for one bag of groceries. Hardly anything's in it. It's the same thing for medication. You have to pay to have them delivered as well too, often. So we pay extra. We have to expend more energy for our equipment. There's no choice. Oh, I'll wait in midnight to charge my wheelchair because there's no more power in there. Well, no. Murielle needs it to be charged. And diet is always something that we think it's not an option. You have to eat, but that's where we can cut, though. You can't cut electricity. If you don't pay your electricity, they'll cut power to your house. You can't cut in rent, but food, it's something that we can have some more control over. So it's diet that suffers. It's one's diet that suffers. And let's not forget that food banks were created in the 90s as a temporary solution. So why are they still there? It's not temporary. It's not temporary 50, 40 years later. Murielle, can you read that quote? Across Canada, nearly 6 million people fight to attain an acceptable amount of food and nutrition. And 50% of these people have a disability. So once again, it's 50% of those in a situation of food insecurity have a disability. You're adding additional costs to the medical system every day that we're not properly feeding ourselves. So we have to start thinking about things this way. Here are two quotes from our members. I am often pulling money for groceries out of budgets that other necessities, such as money for laundry, money for wheelchair repairs, and even money for bills that keep me connected to my community in order to pay the exorbitant costs of groceries. Anonymous. I want everyone who's not having a disability on the Zoom. So imagine the third week of the pandemic, and you were tearing the hair out of your head. You're going nuts because you can't leave the house. No connection to other people. That's what happens to us. We have to cut off all our connections with people. We don't even have enough money to go out for a coffee with a friend. We don't have $1 for coffee at McDonald's. That's not acceptable. People's mental health, the mental health of those with disabilities is worsening. During the pandemic, it wasn't too bad. We were included in lots of things. And 2 weeks after the pandemic was over, you forgot all about us. And the Christelle Robichaud, I, she's an athlete that the people know in Canada. She won lots of Canadian medals at the Paralympics. I can tell you one thing: I hate grocery shopping now. I am buying frozen pizza and more junk food than I was 2 years ago. She doesn't have the means to live. And for an athlete, that's not a good thing. No, not at all. So, so Murielle will talk to you about this one. Shelley, we're halfway. Great. Murielle, go ahead. I did some research on food banks in the region. There are many of them. They're in old buildings. The middle one, for example, it's a church. I spoke to them. If I go there and I'm in a wheelchair, well, somebody can push you inside. There's an elevator. I don't want anybody to push me. I'm independent. I'm on my own. Well, okay. There's an elevator. You need to let us know that you're here. And it's an old elevator. She felt obliged to say that the elevator was old. So, it must have been a pretty old elevator. And there's Ray of Hope as well. That's the red building. It's not wheelchair accessible. Some are wheelchair accessible. Harvest House looks accessible. I didn't call them, but you can see it's on the first floor. Riverview is indeed accessible. If I were to need to go to a food bank, it could happen at any time. It hasn't happened to me yet, but it's coming up. The one in the corner there, the left corner, the lower left-hand corner, where you see the word Louisville Road. There are two steps to go into the door, and it's right off on the sidewalk. There's a step as well. Total of 3 steps. I need to come in to give my ID. I couldn't access this area. We can't choose. If I could choose, I would choose the middle one, the Riverview one. It's much more wheelchair accessible, but it's a transportation issue to get there. It's a bit far. It's not far. It wouldn't have been far when I had my own vehicle. I would have gotten there without any problem. But in the next the town over, if they cross the bridge, you have to know a week in advance that you're going to be running out of food, because transportation that is funded is hard to get. You have to reserve. I look at my fridge like anybody else. Oh, there's nothing in there. Nothing for tomorrow's lunch. So I have to do something. Well, there's nothing I can do. I don't have any food. You always have to take measures in advance. But these are not always things you know in advance. So it's not. A lot of people would think, well, it's the same thing as with other people. A lot of people have access food banks. A lot of people whose budgets make it hard for them to buy food. Things are different for us, though. We have to plan everything. It has to be accessible. It's not as easy as people might think. As people, they have all those services. The government helps them, but it's not like people think it is. And there's a member. We have a member who lives in Moncton. Her child is in a wheelchair. There's supposed to be two. Has a hard time coming out. He's supposed to have 2 workers. The government only provides 1, so the mother can't go out without the child. As with any parent who are waiting for respite care, it never comes. She can't access food banks because he is in a wheelchair and they all have steps. So she doesn't have any choices. Imagine that she would come to the middle one or the red one. Well, what's she supposed to do? Leave her child outside on the sidewalk? That's not necessarily in the best part of town either. It's dangerous and it's not accessible for us. And if the government says you need to use food banks, there should be some delivery provided from the food banks for us. We should have the same, be entitled to the same things as everyone else to access them. If we'll continue to put them in buildings that are not accessible, here we're just talking about accessibility for in terms of mobility. I was in St. John and I'd be waiting for my benefits to start. Well, I was supposed to go to the food bank, but I couldn't enter because there's scented products inside. And I would have been dead on the floor, so it wouldn't have made a difference. So they wouldn't let other people come in for me. I couldn't come in. In terms of me, I can look at Riverview and say, that's accessible. But Shelley, it doesn't matter. There's the ramps are not the big deal for her. It doesn't. She can't see that it's accessible for her. 99.99999%. A good chance they have dryer sheets, for example, inside to give to the members and people. That's not accessible for me. Then the food inside, I can't use it either. So people often talk about government accommodations. Why isn't there accommodation related to food banks? Others could go there for us and use it, and it's good for them. But for those of us who can't, there should be some solutions because we're not eating properly and it makes us sicker. So to close out, we have a few ideas, Murielle and myself, in terms of what to do. If you can work full-time without being punished by the government, provincial government has to stop clawing back our insurance, our medical insurance. Once you start working full-time, they cut your benefits for rent and your medical benefits. If we don't have a medical insurance, we can't work. If we work part-time, it's the same thing. After $500, they claw money back from us. We need to receive benefits that make sense from the government. We need government assistance so that we can work. Most people who can, there are many who can, not all, but there are a great many who can. We would like to work. It's not just a question of a salary, it's mental health as well. And it would help us to buy groceries, leaving the food banks for others. And most of the grocery stores are accessible. So everyone would be win-win. But the government has to work with us. Those who receive money and benefit money, disability amounts from the federal government is still limited. It's based on what you do. It's not a large amount of money. And the provincial government has to stop saying, you're not our responsibility. There needs to be insurance. And if we need help from food banks, stop saying, well, how much money are you earning? We don't earn money. When you make $1,200 a month to live, it's not much money. Those who are on private insurance, it's even worse. People think that life is good. Well, oftentimes we don't have medical insurance or we need to pay for it. And often we don't qualify for other forms of assistance. The government needs to start to look to see that it costs us a lot more to live with a disability, and then we need their help. If you want to have access to food banks, they need to be there. They need to be that they're only allowed to be in accessible buildings where there are automatic doors, where there are ramps, and that the ramps is not behind, hidden, where it's at the door that everyone uses. And there's access to the food that we need, especially if you have celiac or problems, stomach problems. For example, myself with my intestines, It affects us all. And so this is sort of a comment. Thank you for the comment, Bill. We'll talk about it after in the Q&A section. And why does the government continue to say go look for help with your friends and your family? They're not able to do this, and it shouldn't always fall on them to support us. Life is hard for everyone, all Canadians. We know it. It's not up to our parents to pay this. You're 50 years old. You don't say, hey, mom, can I have 50 bucks to buy some bread? So a few potential solutions. We have to increase the financial amounts we receive, stop punishing us, and make it easier to let us work for those of us who can work. We need better coverage for essentials, equipment. You can't even imagine how hard you have to fight when you need a wheelchair or a medical bed or sometimes it's the small things as well. This week, I would need to bring my inflatable pillow that I sit on. I have bed sore problems. I'm never in a bed, but I have to use it. I have to bring it in, but I don't have a vehicle. So it's $75 per hour to fix my mattress. But since I can't bring it, I also have to pay so that somebody would come to pick it up from here. If that's money, it'll probably cost me $200 to fix up the mattress, and that's not covered by insurance. The time it would take to get it approved by social development, I don't have too much to do with social development. It would too long just for the mattress. It doesn't make any sense. That's a $200 that I could use to pay for groceries. It won't go for groceries. It'll go for a mattress. And the difference between the transit in various regions, if you live in Greater Moncton and Riverview, there's 50 trips available. Dieppe, it's what, 6, 8? And you have to fight for that. That includes your groceries, your appointments, your medical appointments. Some people need dialysis and they don't have transportation. What will it cost us as taxpayers? It doesn't make any sense.
3 minutes, Shelley.
3 minutes remaining, Shelley. The last one is specialized solutions. We're the experts on our own situations. If I tell the government I need this, we should try to provide it. Ultimately, it will save money. A lot of money, actually. So, sorry? I'm going to stop share. Good timing. So, for us, we want people to remember that people with disabilities, studies say that 84% of Canadians think that we receive everything that we need. Unfortunately, that's not true. And when we're not properly fed, the cost of the medical system is huge. And I'm zipping my lips up now. Thank you for your attention, everyone. Yes, thank you. Murielle, Shelley, thank you. Huge thanks
for sharing your experiences and helping us to better understand the disproportionate impacts that, not only food insecurity, but poverty, ableism that have on you both personally, but on so many disabled individuals. Bill, thank you also for sharing in the chat. So as Murielle said, we'll come back later, but Bill shared some of his experience in the chat. So you both help to bring, you both bring a lot of courage and honesty to your presentation and words. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure I can speak for everyone else that it just helps outline the urgent need for meaningful change.
Yeah, we're an open door. We'll discuss pretty much anything that people want to ask. We're open to, because the more you hear about people's experiences, the lived experience, the more you'll understand.
That's right.
About what it's like to live with a disability, no matter what disability.
So thank you so much for sharing. Suzanne is asking a question in the chat, but we have to take a quick pause, everyone. So we're going to hold that question, Suzanne. On va tenir la question. And we're going to take a brief
hold
5 minutes,
that question.
We don't typically do this,
On va prendre 5 minutes, mais on veut que notre interprète prenne une courte pause pour son cerveau. Alors, nous allons revenir à 12h44. Alors, vous pouvez prendre ce moment-là pour vous étirer un peu, vous bouger un peu. Vous pouvez éteindre vos caméras si vous voulez, boire un peu d'eau. Alors, on va mettre l'enregistrement sur pause. Et re-bienvenue. Et maintenant, on va maintenant accueillir notre deuxième conférencier, Dana Milne. Dana est une meneur de campagne avec organisatrice nationale afin que sa vision, c'est avoir un endroit au Canada pour l'alimentation qui nourrit le sentiment d'appartenance et la justice sociale. Partie de l'unité d'action sur la pauvreté, elle travaille avec plus de 400 organisations à travers le Canada, notamment ici au Nouveau-Brunswick, afin de réduire l'insécurité alimentaire et la pauvreté. Son organisation fait partie de la table ronde sur l'invalidité. Elle a travaillé avec des partenaires pour encourager une prestation sur l'invalidité du Canada qui est suffisante afin que s'assurer que toutes les personnes souffrant de handicap puissent vivre dans la dignité. Ce n'est pas stratège où elle anime des réunions, elle conçoit des campagnes, elle aime bien faire des promenades avec son chien, lire des romans et voyager avec sa famille à la recherche de la prochaine aventure. Alors, Dana, je partage vos diapos. Alors, je commence le partage maintenant et je vous cède la parole. Merci, Jill. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est bien de vous rejoindre aujourd'hui. J'espère que vous n'allez pas entendre mon chien. Elle devient un peu... il y a de l'anxiété s'il y a quelqu'un à la porte. C'est bon de vous rejoindre. Et je voudrais commencer en remerciant Shelley et Murielle d'avoir partagé ces réalités-là, la réalité de vivre avec une invalidité au Nouveau-Brunswick. Moi, je vais vous présenter des statistiques qui montrent que ce que vous vivez au Nouveau-Brunswick, malheureusement, ce n'est pas unique. On voit que la pauvreté, l'insécurité alimentaire et le handicap sont liés, malheureusement. Avant de commencer avec les statistiques, je vais vous parler un peu de la définition gouvernementale de la pauvreté et l'origine des chiffres à laquelle je vais faire référence. Le gouvernement définit la pauvreté, la mesure du panier, en utilisant la mesure du panier de consommation, la mesure officielle de la pauvreté au Canada. Alors,
the government feels represents a basic standard of living, and then they compare those costs with the incomes of individuals and of families to decide whether somebody falls below or above a poverty line. And there isn't actually one poverty line. It varies depending on where you live across the country because costs
ça dépend
vary.
de la...
alors,
c'est une mesure imparfaite. Alors, sur le plan de la prochaine diapo, Murielle Shelley va parler un peu de l'insécurité alimentaire. Le gouvernement définit l'insécurité alimentaire comme accès inadéquat à l'alimentation en raison d'un manque de revenus.
Which uses a survey. They survey groups of people.
Check 1, 2, 3. Check 1, 2, 3.
To marginal, moderate, or severe forms of food insecurity. So when they talk about marginal food insecurity, they're talking about people who are thinking about and worried about need to buy more, but they're not actually experiencing food security in the sense of like having to make difficult choices. But people who are moderately food insecure are compromising. So they may not buy as much food, or they may buy food that's not as healthy or nutritious because it's more expensive, because they basically are having difficulty being able to afford a balanced diet. And then those who are defined as most severely food insecure are people that are making very real decisions all the time about whether they can afford food, and often they can't, and so they are skipping meals. They might decide to feed their kids and not eat themselves. They're not eating enough, and so it's having a significant impact for their lives. So moving into the next slide, we'll look at Canada overall. And so sometimes like people wonder, is there a relationship between poverty and food insecurity? And, we were probably, most of us are not wondering about that. We know that, of course, there is. And we can see here in this slide that that the number of people living in poverty has grown from 2022 to 2023, and those are the most recent statistics that we have. And then if you look to the left of that, you'll see that food insecurity has also grown, and it's grown by more. And there are significantly more people who are experiencing food insecurity than people who are experiencing poverty. And, that's because, these poverty lines that the government establishes are kind of arbitrary in the sense of like, as Shelley and Murielle pointed out, like they kind of make generalizations about how much money somebody needs to be able to meet their basic needs in a particular part of the country. But we all know that sometimes, people's needs vary, and it isn't enough money. And so that's why there are always more people who are experiencing food insecurity than there are people who are living below, some kind of government defined poverty line. And for us, the biggest concern is like if people are not being able to eat the way that they want to, they're not able to afford the food that they need, then that's a big concern. And of course, being at an organization that wants to create community around food, if the fact that so many people are struggling to put food on the table is a big concern for us. So then if we look at the next slide, we're looking at what food insecurity rates are across the country. And so you'll see New Brunswick, I think it's, yes, my eyesight here, I think it's 25.6%. And so that is actually the lowest food insecurity rates in the Atlantic region, but not by very much. They're all in the kind of mid-20s, which is similar, I think, across many of the provinces. You look at Nunavut, where 46% of people living in Nunavut are experiencing food insecurity, which is, really concerning. And then you look at places like the Yukon and in Quebec, where food insecurity rates are lower. And I think you'll find that in those provinces, the social policies are stronger, and people just have higher incomes, and so are therefore experiencing lesser rates of food insecurity. But no matter how you look at this map of the country, we're seeing really high rates of food insecurity, where literally a quarter of the people in all these provinces, for the most part, are experiencing food insecurity, which of course as a country should really concern us. So if we start to drill down a bit more into the Atlantic provinces, we can see that what's happening here, like across the Atlantic regions, is similar to what we're seeing across the country. So we're seeing growing levels of poverty here on the right side of the graph, and And then we're seeing on the left side a correlated increases to overall food insecurity. And then if you look at, you know, how that breaks down, we're seeing increases in food insecurity, whether it's like marginal food insecurity, moderate food insecurity, and severe food insecurity. But of course, what's most concerning is that the greatest increase is in terms of people who are experiencing severe food insecurity. So, you know, these are people, you know, as Murielle and Shelley mentioned, you know, just do not have enough to eat and are having to make really serious, you know, choices about whether to eat or get medications or get your wheelchair fixed or pay your hydro bills, pay your rent. And so it's having a really significant impact on a lot of people's lives. And that situation is getting worse rather than getting better. We look at the next slide and we start to drill down into New Brunswick. Again, very similar. Poverty rates are increasing, and overall food insecurity is increasing as well. And those food insecurity rates are dramatically higher than the poverty rates. But here's where, you know, when you look at who's experiencing marginal food insecurity, moderate and severe, we see here in New Brunswick that there is actually a drop in people who are experiencing moderate food insecurity. And of course, you know, we want to be really optimistic and say, oh, well, you know, that's hopefully because some of those people are now experiencing marginal food insecurity. So they're, you know, things have improved for them. But if we look at this chart, like we'll see that the number of people experiencing severe food insecurity is growing at a greater rate than those who are experiencing marginal or moderate, which implies that, you know, as the, you know, people are living through the pandemic and, you know, all the rising cost of living and of rents in particular, then, you know, more and more people are moving into severe food insecurity, which of course is really concerning. So then moving to the next slide, the reality for in 2023, what we know from the statistics is that there are 8.7 million people in Canada experiencing food insecurity, and that is nearly 1 in 4 people. So literally a quarter of Canada's population is now experiencing some form of food insecurity. And so that's why we have started talking about it as an absolute crisis. You know, Murielle, you had talked about, you know, just trying to go to a food bank that's inaccessible. You can't get up the steps. You know, even if every food bank was accessible and everyone could get in, and there would never be enough food. And that's what we're seeing at Community Food Centers Canada, in our network of more than 400 community food organizations. We're hearing over and over and over again that there just isn't enough food, and people are having to make, you know, organizations are making really difficult decisions about who to give food to and how often and what kind of food, and you know, the cost of food is just increasing. And so you know, it's a real challenge and a real crisis. And of course, you know, across the country, people aren't experiencing that crisis evenly. It's, you know, some groups of people are experiencing it more intensely than others. And this particular graph shows who all of those groups are. And I'll point out that, like, at the bottom of that chart, in the middle, we see that like 30% of families where the main breadwinner has a disability are experiencing food insecurity. So 30%. So right there, we see that that rates of poverty and food insecurity and disability all go hand in hand. And so if we want to kind of drill down a little bit more, we'll look at the next slide. We see that here, when you look at people with compare people with disabilities to people who do not have disabilities, we see that 12% of people with disabilities over the age of 15 are experiencing poverty, compared to just 7% who are experiencing poverty but do not have a disability. And similarly, in households where the main income earner has a disability, 30% of those households are experiencing food insecurity, compared to just 18%. So again, it's indisputable. There are definitely links between food insecurity and poverty, and just by the mere fact of having a disability. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see, though, that even among people with disabilities, they're not experiencing food insecurity in the same way. So if you look at the severity of people's disabilities, what we see very clearly here is that as the severity of someone's disability grows, they will experience a greater rate of food insecurity. So you look at someone here on the right side of this chart, someone who has a mild disability is experiencing 20% of those people with mild disabilities are experiencing food insecurity, and that's compared to 38% of people with very severe disabilities. And I think that, why do we think that is, right? Why does it matter what disability somebody has? And this just, like, I don't have the statistics to say this definitively, but I think we know from what people like Murielle and Shelley share is that the more severe a person's disability, the more difficult it is to find work or to remain working. And I think we can make the assumption that people with milder disabilities are probably more likely to be working and therefore less likely to be experiencing food insecurity. And it's when people with disabilities cannot work and they have to rely on the kinds of provincial and federal income supports that Shelley and Murielle that you mentioned. It's when you have to rely on those supports, and those supports do not bring you above the poverty line, that's when we see the incidence of food insecurity growing. So then if we look to the next slide.
And Dana, I'll just let you're at the halfway mark.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Okay, so then if we look at this last slide, we will see that it's no surprise that people with disabilities who have the highest incomes, surprise, surprise, they experience the lowest rates of food insecurity, right? And if you're someone with a disability relying on federal or provincial disability supports, are not even able to access those supports because of the challenges of applying and getting all the medical forms, and so you're living on social assistance, you have no control over, like, very little control over the income that you have. And therefore, if the income is not enough, as Shelley and Murielle pointed out so ably, then you're going to be experiencing food insecurity. So, that's why we see, a person with a disability who has a high income is, only 12% of those people are likely to be experiencing food insecurity, and why someone who's in the lowest income quintiles, which we can assume, or someone who is not able to work, 49% of those people are experiencing food insecurity. So literally half. So, if we just go to the next slide, this is where I want to kind of shift away from talking about statistics. I think we can generally just say they are indisputable and they are damning. And that's why CSCC created our Poverty Action Unit. And that's the team that I'm with. We created it because we wanted to sound the alarm about the food insecurity crisis across the country. And we wanted to start pushing back against these ideas out there that everybody just needs to get a job, and that a job and going back to work is the answer to reducing poverty and the answer to reducing food insecurity. And because we know that's not the whole story, or that's not the only story, and it's not the real story out there. Next slide. So, I think it's really important that we start to change the narrative. At CFCC, as much as we believe in the power of food, and I'm sure all of you, part of Food for All New Brunswick, that you look at this very similar. We do believe in the power of food, but we know it's not the answer to food insecurity. Increasing incomes is the single most effective way to reduce poverty and to reduce food insecurity. And so that's why our campaigns over the last couple of years have been all about income and not about food at all. Next slide. So a couple of years ago, when we made that decision to focus on income in terms of our advocacy, we realized that just us as CFCC talking about income it's not enough. Or we're just one organization, and we would, if we speak, even if we go to Parliament Hill and we talk to some politicians, they're like, who are you? You're one organization. We know that our strength is the network of organizations that we are all together a part of. And so at Community Food Centers Canada, we have created a network of almost 400 organizations across the country. And last year, we, for the first time, we created 6 regional advocacy networks, including one here in the Atlantic region. And we did that because we wanted to bring organizations in our network together to start talking about how can we advocate together and what can we advocate around so that we can increase people's incomes across the country and really start reducing food insecurity in a way that we just can't in our own individual food banks and community food programs. And so, next slide. So we created those regional networks, and it's through those networks that we have begun, this project of building a movement. It's very ambitious. It's not something you can just do in a couple of months. But what we are trying to do is build some capacity across our network and collaborate together to advocate to reduce poverty and food insecurity collectively together. And so what our focus is on increasing incomes in the short term, because it's a crisis and people are experiencing deep amounts of food insecurity, which is having a huge impact on people's lives. So we don't want to be advocating for solutions that are going to take literally decades. We are wanting to focus on ideas and policies that can increase incomes in the shorter term. And we're focusing initially on working age adults between the ages of 18 and 64. Not because we don't think that children or seniors are also experiencing food insecurity, but because adults who are between the ages 18 and 64, for the most part, people just expect them to work. And it's not a reality that it doesn't hold up to reality. And we want to start challenging that and challenging all the stigma and the stereotypes that exist, particularly for people who are in that age group. And those people also are the ones that are least likely to benefit from any kinds of government supports. And when there are supports there, as Murielle and Shelley pointed out, they're extremely low, right? So that's why we're kind of starting there and focusing there. And what we want to do is to win adequate federal income supports in the long term. So next slide. So 2 years ago, when we made the shift to focusing around income, we decided to join the Disability Without Poverty campaign for a Canada Disability benefit. So that was our very first campaign. So why did we choose that campaign? Next slide. Well, the Canada Disability benefit, I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but it's a benefit that will provide a monthly income, so a monthly amount of income specifically for people with disabilities across the country, so across Canada. And it's been described as, being something similar to the guaranteed income supplement that seniors get. And so, and that's exciting. it's one of the reasons why I think of the Canada Disability Benefit literally as a once in a generation income support benefit, right? Because it's a standalone benefit only for people with disabilities, and that's extremely rare at the federal level. The other kinds of disability supports that exist at the federal level mostly are linked to employment. So if people work, then they are eligible for it. But if they didn't, they don't get those benefits. Or if there are benefits there that are not linked to employment, they're really low. So this was a recognition for the first time that that people with disabilities deserve a level of income that lifts them out of poverty. And so when this benefit was first announced, everyone was very, very hopeful that it would be a standalone benefit, that it would be adequate, because the goal of the government's goal in creating the Canada Disability Benefit specifically mentions lifting people with disabilities out of poverty. So the goal of these benefits often isn't lifting people out of poverty, but this one, that was a stated goal, and it's a stated goal in the legislation. And the government has also commented a number of times on the fact that this Canada Disability Benefit should be on top of any kinds of provincial or territorial or other kinds of federal income supports that people with disabilities get. So if you take all of those benefits together, what you get provincially, other kinds of federal benefits, plus the Canada Disability Benefit, the idea, the hope was that that would lift a significant number of people with disabilities above the poverty line in their communities. And that's what makes it a once in a generation type of a benefit, right? That is what makes it so important. And so if we look at the next slide, if this is such a wonderful benefit, then why do we need a campaign around it, right? Well, it's because, of course, what gets promised and what gets delivered is not always the same thing. And usually it isn't, right? And so it's the same with the Canada Disability Benefit. So when the government announced this, when they promised a Canada Disability Benefit, and this is about 4 years ago now, there was a group of people with disabilities that came together and said, you know what, we want this, we want to see this benefit, we want to make it happen, and we want to make sure that it's actually enough to lift people with disabilities out of poverty. So they created Disability Without Poverty, and their mission was specifically to secure a Canada Disability Benefit and to include people with disabilities in the design of that benefit and make sure it rolled out as quickly as possible and didn't take decades to happen, right? And so that's specifically their purpose, is to organize around a Canada Disability Benefit, and to do that in a way that they would their mission was to mobilize grassroots power, meaning to just work with people with disabilities in communities across the country to advocate for a Canada Disability Benefit that they could all believe in, and to work with government to ensure that that's the kind of Canada Disability Benefit we got, right? So that's why at CFCC, where I work, why we joined that campaign, because our vision and our mission were literally identical to this. We had a network of organizations across the country that we wanted to work with, and that we wanted to build power with, and we wanted to be able to have conversations with local members of parliament, and try and get a better Canada Disability Benefit, because we know if we could get more money to people with disabilities across the country, that would reduce food insecurity.
And Dana, you have about 4 minutes left.
Okay. Okay. So next slide. I guess in short, there is a strong public support for lifting people with disability out of poverty. And that's really important because there isn't always strong support for different kinds of income supports that the government makes promises around. But this one has very strong support, not only among the public, but when the Canada Disability Benefit was eventually passed into legislation, it was supported by every party, every member of parliament. And that's also really rare. We look at the next slide. I wanted to just talk a little bit about the campaign that we've done. I think it's easy to feel discouraged, but my experience as a campaigner is that campaigns are always roller coasters. There's always up and down kinds of moments. And if you look at the history of this campaign, you'll see that that's exactly what's happened. Initially, the government promised to create a Canada Disability Benefit, which was really exciting. And then when the government finally introduced it as legislation, then that legislation died. Because there was an election called. And then after the election, well, then you have to start all over again and try and get it tabled again as legislation. And that happened a year later. And then once it's tabled as legislation, then you have to get it through the House of Commons and you have to get it passed in the committee and passed by Senate. It takes a long, long time. It can drag on. And sometimes these bills can just die there. But this one didn't. We all organized and we got it through with all party support. And then it was about, once you have the legislation, well, what is it going to look like, right? And that's very important. That determines how much it's going to be, how you access it, who will be eligible, who won't be. And so that's when Disability Without Poverty launched their Shape the CDB report. And some of you may have participated in that. They held interviews and surveys with 5,000 people with disabilities and their families, just talking about what the Canada Disability Benefit should look like. And then they released their Disability with Possibility report. And then they shifted their focus after that to trying, once the bill was passed and we had the legislation, which is important because if the government changes power, it's legislation. It's not easily just cut. And so it'll still be there regardless of what happens in the next federal election. And so the focus shifted to getting money budgeted because that would determine the amount. And then, of course, in April 2024 of this year, the government finally announced funding, but it was only $200 a month. And in order to qualify, people would need to apply first for the disability tax credit, which is notoriously really challenging to apply for and requires medical forms that are not easy to get, and it can be a very confusing process. So it was an exciting moment because it was finally funded, but it was also a discouraging moment because it was only $200 a month, and of course we know that's not enough to lift people with disabilities out of poverty. And so that's why Disability with Poverty is continuing to organize around the Canada Disability Benefit. And the government recently released the regulations, which are the rules. And there was another opportunity to kind of participate in those consultations and share again what our vision of a Canada Disability Benefit is. And so we did all of that, and we're continuing to push around it, and we're continuing to push for more funding so that the amount that goes out is more adequate. And so
Dana,
next.
Dana, I'll let you know you're at time.
I'm at time. Okay.
But cool. You can wrap up if you like.
Wrap up? Okay. Yeah. All right. Wow. Well, I guess I'll wrap up by saying, take a look at the slides after. There's a lot more. But what I wanted to emphasize, I guess, is that what I like about why campaigns are so important is that they do bring people together. And so in this particular campaign, there have been really strong alliances built between the disability sector and the food security sector. So Community Food Centers Canada, Daily Bread Food Bank, Food Banks Canada, Maple Leaf Center for Food Security are all very supportive of this campaign and have all been working together. And I think that's why we've seen a lot of public support, why we've seen a lot of support across all parties, and is why I feel hopeful that that this campaign isn't over, that even if in July, when the Canada Disability Benefit rolls out, it's only $200 a month, it will grow. We will be able to get increases to it, and hopefully that won't take a decade to do, right? So I'm hopeful, and that's why I wanted to come and share that with you, and say that, I know it's really tough when you're seeing, really high numbers of people coming, or you're living with a disability yourself and experiencing that food insecurity crisis in a real way. That, I think we are at a different moment than we were before. There is more recognition that people with disabilities, should not have to be working as the only way of living outside of poverty.
Thank you so much, Dana. I hate to have to cut you off in the middle of, you've got slides.
I shouldn't have spent so long on this stats.
Well, I think everything you've shared has been fabulous. I'm leaving this slide up for the moment, the Right to Afford Food campaign, December 10th, just in case people want to see that information for a minute. But we do also want to get to some questions, and we have about 10 minutes left with you all. And like 9, and we'll sort of wrap up and share a final survey. Perhaps I'll stop sharing my screen for the moment, and we can spotlight Murielle and Shelley and Dana, and I'll open it up to the floor to questions. We saw earlier that Bill Farrow is in the room and may still be in the room, and shared sort of his own experience. So Bill, thank you again for that. I don't know if you wanted to say anything directly to take the floor, or if there are other questions, feel free to just go ahead and unmute. You can ask, or you can put them in the chat, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. And while we wait, Dana, I don't know if you've shared on this Right to Afford Food campaign, if you want to give a quick plug on that.
Sure. So we have December 10th is Human Rights Day, and sorry, it's calling me. So December 10th is Human Rights Day, and we wanted to mark that by talking about the right to food. And the right to food is a right that the federal government has committed to, but of course it's unrealized. And so for December 10th, we are creating a number of social media materials that you can use and share through your social media networks. And we are also working with a number of organizations in our network to write letters to the editor. And we have done we have just held some trainings on how to do that. But if there is anyone who did not attend those trainings and is interested in writing a letter to the editor, there's information there on that slide in terms of you can reach out to us, and we'll help you do that and match you with a media outlet, just because we don't want folks all approaching the same media, because then it's less likely to get letters published. So that's just something we're doing to kind of keep awareness around the right to food. And for us, it's the right to afford food, because of course people are not, if they don't have access to food because they can't afford it and they can't afford to buy it.
Right. And I see a question. I see a hand. I see someone I know, Suzanne Fournier. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Thanks so much for the presentations, everyone. I am executive director of the National Farmers Union in New Brunswick. I also have Crohn's disease. And I'm curious, I am envisioning, some of the work that we do really directly overlaps with what you're talking about. But I guess my question is, what can the farmers do to, help with the food insecurity disability intersection?
Yeah, Shelley, I see you. Yeah,
That's
go
a
ahead.
great question. I would say first thing is, I mean, I would love to see so much more of the farm to table programs out there made available. So there are some bag programs through the libraries where you can get some great, like a large reusable grocery store bag of fruits, of vegetables and produce for $15. But often you have to be able to get to the library. So again, it's a mobility or transit issue. And it would be lovely if there was a way, because we know if we're having more access to fresh fruits and vegetables, people are healthier. It keeps them from developing. So many people are developing, right? They're put on medications and they develop IBS-C or IBS-D. And medications, we throwing more and more pills at people doesn't help. It's just developing a reaction to that medication that then has to be treated. Fresh fruits and vegetables, healthy eating is the number one thing that we can be doing for our population. I'm excited for, at least in the schools, we now have the programs with breakfast and lunch. I was a teacher before my disability forced me to stop working, and the amount of students that I had that could not concentrate, they could not learn because they were so hungry. And behavior problems all start right after lunch because they were starving or they just ate a bunch of junk food because that's what they could afford. When a bottle of Sunny D or pop is a quarter the price of juice, there's a problem, or milk, right? So I would say the new government seems to want to work with us. I would be approaching the Minister of Development, the Minister, the Premier, saying, what type of co-workings can we do to help get some of these foods and vegetables in a healthy way, and to the nursing homes, because my mom eats way too much frozen crap. And she's an example of what happens when we don't take care of people. She did not have access to a universal design apartment, caught her foot on a little lift, fell, broke her hips, sat on the floor for 12 hours before anyone found her, and is now in a nursing home that the government's paying $3,000 a month for. We didn't need any of that cost, right?
Right. We need to design better spaces for
better spaces. Our seniors deserve better. Our seniors deserve more respect than that, right? Every New Brunswicker, I keep saying, everything is designed to the lowest measure, the minimum standards. I'm sorry, but we all deserve better than the minimum standards.
And we can all benefit, whether whether we have a disability or not. And I think, Murielle, maybe you could build on this, because we know you're in a wheelchair, and just sort of, with Suzanne's question.
Had to run to the washroom.
She may have gone to the washroom. Okay, well, if she comes back,
I want to step in.
Accessibility.
I want to step in if I could. It's Bill.
Hey, Bill.
I'm in the senior capacity now, and when I turned 65, everything in disability that I'm receiving when I got sick was cut off, and then I was put over to old age pension and the supplement, but it took a year to get the supplement. It's a fixed income, and all most of the monies that I had for my retirement all went into paying for my health costs. Between the time I went sick until I turned 65, I had to use that pensional money at age 55. And so I've lived it, I've worked it, I volunteered in it, and I'm still surviving, but it's really tight. And I've just gone into a wheelchair full time, and thankfully I found funding for that. But it's not easy when your income start turning off on you, and you have to advocate at the age of 65 to get benefits that you're no longer getting. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, so much for sharing your, it's nice to see you here, and thanks for sharing your experience. I want to go over to Suzanne. Suzanne, voudrais-tu demander ta question?
Would you like to ask your question?
Merci,
Thank you. I should have asked 2 hours. This is a really interesting event. I work on the Mobility Council, NB, the Foundations for Breakfast in the Acadian Peninsula, Think Fresh, and the Economic and Social Inclusion Board. And now we're coming with our fourth plan to reduce poverty. It's going to come out in January 2025. So we hope that all of these aspects will be covered. Everything that we talked about today, especially food insecurity, I really find it very touching. I myself, my husband had a really bad accident. He's handicapped. He's disabled. I know what you're experiencing. They asked me why I'm working at my age. Well, I have a disabled husband. We're still happy. I do thank you for this day. It was really, really interesting. And thank you, Murielle. Thank you, Dana. And thank you, Shelley. Thank you so very much. Yes, thank you. Thanks to you as well. Your work makes a difference.
And so already we've gone through all of our time. Can you believe it? We should have had 2 hours, Suzanne. You're right. I think with that, we want to be mindful of everybody's time. And I just want to say, a huge thank you to Shelley, Murielle, and Dana, and to all of the people here in the room today coming to learn a little bit more about, these different intersections of food. I also want to say a big thanks to the New Brunswick Department of Health and Medavie, our funding partners, our host organization, the United Way of Central New Brunswick. And in the chat, what we'll do here, actually, Andre Muse, our interpreter as well, and organizing team, a big thanks. In the chat, we're going to put in a short survey. So we'd just love to get your feedback. It helps us plan events that are useful to you all. And we will be sending out, just as a reminder, the recording and the survey link again via email soon. Shelley and Murielle and Dana have given so many fabulous resources. So we'll be looking to include those on the Food for All website. And we have a newsletter coming out next week. So Dana, we can connect and make sure that we sort of communicate on some of those bigger things coming too. If you haven't already, you can also see the rest of our What the Food episodes on our YouTube channel. This will be the last episode for the year, but we're gonna have to continue these. It's just too fun to say the title, and it offers us an opportunity to dig in a little bit more deeply on so many more things. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. Happy day, and we'll hope to connect with you all again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.